When I think back to the early days of my marriage to Jessica, it feels like a lifetime ago. We were the quintessential couple, both in our late 30s, living in a cozy suburban house outside Chicago with a dog named Max and a perfectly manicured lawn. I was an ambitious marketing manager, and she was my equal, a woman who knew what she wanted and went after it with a fierce determination. I loved that about her. But as the years went by, things started to change. The little signs crept in slowly like weeds in a flower bed. It began with her late nights at the office. At first, I thought nothing of it. Jessica was driven and dedicated, often the first to arrive and the last to leave. But as the months rolled by, those late nights turned into something more ominous. She started coming home with a different scent lingering on her clothes, one I didn't recognize. I'd ask her about it and she'd brush it off, claiming it was a new perfume for a client meeting. I wanted to believe her, but there was a nagging doubt gnawing at me. Then there were the texts. Jessica had always been private about her phone, but she'd become almost secretive. Gone were the days of being able to peek at her screen or casually ask who she was chatting with. Instead, she'd quickly lock her phone whenever I entered the room, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was like living with a stranger. One evening, I was cleaning out the garage when I stumbled upon an old box filled with paperwork and forgotten items. Among the dusty files and receipts, I found a stack of printed emails. At first, I thought they were just junk, formal correspondence from her job, but as I skimmed through them, my heart sank. One email stood out, sent from her personal assistant, Mark. It was filled with flirtatious banter, teasing about meeting for drinks and other comments that made my stomach turn. I felt my blood run cold. I hadn't thought much of Mark before. He seemed like a nice enough guy, always respectful and professional whenever I saw him at their office. But reading those words changed everything. I confronted Jessica later that night, my heart racing and fists clenched, trying to maintain my composure. I will never forget the look on her face when I laid out the evidence before her. Her initial reaction was a mix of shock and anger, like I had accused her of something absurd. "You're not seriously questioning me about some stupid emails, are you?" she snapped, her voice sharp. I watched as she transformed from a loving wife to someone defensive and cold, denying everything, spinning elaborate lies about how Mark was just a friend, how they were working on a big project together, and using phrases like, "You're being paranoid and you don't trust me." I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, listening to the woman I loved make excuses that felt so hollow. As she rambled on, I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, mixing with betrayal and disbelief. My mind raced with memories of our life together, and suddenly, every moment felt tainted with doubt. I had trusted her wholeheartedly, and here she was, crafting a narrative that was as far from the truth as possible. The confrontation ended with her storming out, declaring I was overreacting and needed to calm down. I stood there in silence, grappling with the heartache that was consuming me. How could she do this? How could someone who claimed to love me betray me so deeply? I was left alone, the echoes of her voice haunting me, the weight of her betrayal pressing down like a heavy fog. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I paced the floor, heart racing, mind racing. I felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and confusion. I had never imagined my life would take this turn, and I had no idea where to go from here. I kept replaying that moment over and over in my head. I wanted answers, clarity, and most importantly, revenge. Little did she know the storm was just beginning. As I lay awake, plotting my next steps, something within me shifted. I wouldn't just roll over and accept this betrayal. I had been wronged, and she would pay for it. I had a plan forming in my mind, one that would ensure my wife and her lover would face the consequences of their actions, consequences that would resonate far beyond our home. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The details of what I was about to do were not only about revenge, but also about reclaiming my power and ensuring that Jessica never forgot the pain she had inflicted upon me. I was ready to fight back. After that night, I became a man on a mission. The shock of Jessica's betrayal had ignited something in me, a primal instinct to protect what was mine and to ensure that she understood the gravity of her actions. I knew I had to gather evidence, not just to confront her again, but to build a case that would dismantle her credibility and potentially ruin her career. The very career she had prioritized over our marriage. I started by digging into her work life, both out of necessity and a sense of vindication. I reached out to old friends who still worked at her company, casually asking about Mark and Jessica's projects. The more I learned, the more I realized how entwined they were. They were a team, often going out for client meetings together, always sticking close in the office. My gut churned with each new piece of information. It was clear she'd been lying through her teeth, and I intended to expose that. I set up a plan. First, I had to catch them in the act. I began tracking Jessica's movements, creating a mental map of her schedule. I noted when she was supposed to be at work late and when she had meetings. My instinct told me that Mark would be the one to let her down, so I kept my ear to the ground, waiting for the right moment to strike. One Friday evening, Jessica told me she had a late meeting with a client. I let her leave, my heart racing with excitement and dread. I grabbed my things and headed to her office. I didn't even bother pretending to be casual. I was there to confirm what I already suspected. As I arrived, I parked a couple of blocks away and watched her office building from a distance. 2 hours passed and I was beginning to feel foolish when suddenly I saw them. Jessica and Mark walked out together, laughing and leaning into each other as they crossed the street towards a nearby bar. I felt a rush of adrenaline. There it was, proof. I followed them at a distance, careful not to be seen. The bar was dimly lit, a perfect place for clandestine meetings. I found a seat at the back, keeping my eyes glued to them. They sat at a corner booth, giggling like teenagers, their body language all too familiar. I felt like I was watching a movie, one I didn't choose to see. They shared drinks, and as the night wore on, the intimate moments escalated. Whispers, touches, and laughter filled the air. At that moment, I felt a mix of emotions: rage, betrayal, and a deep sense of loss. I had invested so much into our relationship, our life together, and now I was watching it crumble before my eyes. I could barely breathe as I watched them lean in close, their foreheads nearly touching, and I could feel my heart shattering into a million pieces. But this wasn't the end for me, it was just the beginning. I pulled out my phone and recorded their interactions. I took videos of them chatting, laughing, and leaning close. I didn't even care how my heart ached. I was focused on the prize. The evidence I needed for my revenge. After what felt like an eternity, I finally left the bar, my head swirling with thoughts. I had what I needed, but now the real game began. I needed to act strategically. I knew that simply confronting Jessica again wouldn't suffice. She needed to understand the consequences of her actions. I spent the weekend organizing everything I had gathered. I saved the videos and screenshots, meticulously documenting the timeline of her infidelity. I researched the ways to approach this without causing a scene. I wanted to ensure that when I revealed what I knew, it would be undeniable, inescapable. I also started reconnecting with some of my business contacts. I knew Jessica's industry well, and I had friends in high places who could help me orchestrate her downfall. My mind was racing with possibilities. I could pull strings, make calls, and send emails that would reach decision makers at her company. If I played my cards right, I could ensure her career took a nosedive. The culmination of my plan was taking shape. I wasn't just going to ruin her relationship with Mark. I was out to destroy everything she had worked for. She had betrayed me, and I would make sure she felt the full force of her actions. There was no going back now. I was ready to unleash my revenge. As the days passed, I found myself feeling more empowered. Each time I looked at the evidence, the anger that had surged within me settled into a cold determination. I was no longer the heartbroken husband. I was the architect of my own justice, and I was ready to build my blueprint and watch it unfold. With my plan slowly taking shape, I felt a surge of confidence. The betrayal I had endured was now fueling my every decision. I had spent the weekend collecting evidence, documenting everything meticulously. I'd even gone as far as to create a timeline of Jessica's infidelity, detailing every late night, every strange excuse, and most importantly, every interaction with Mark. It was like assembling a puzzle that had come together beautifully, and now I was ready for the next phase of my plan. I decided to prepare for the confrontation, knowing it would be one of the most pivotal moments in my life. I had watched enough crime shows to know that a good confrontation required both evidence and calm. I would need to remain composed, despite the storm of emotions swirling within me. The last thing I wanted was for her to deflect blame or twist the narrative. I had to be ready for her lies and her manipulations. On Tuesday after work, I asked Jessica to meet me at home. I dressed casually but deliberately. My heart raced with both anticipation and dread as I waited for her to come through the door. I had spent hours pacing, rehearsing what I would say, mentally preparing for her defensive tactics, and trying to remain focused on the truth. When she walked in, she greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek, unaware of the damning evidence I held like a loaded gun. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, dropping her bag on the kitchen counter and grabbing a glass of water. There was an air of normalcy about her, and I hated it. I cleared my throat, trying to find my voice. "Jessica, we need to talk," I said, my tone steady. The casualness of her demeanor disappeared as she caught the seriousness in my voice. "I know what you've been doing." Her eyes widened for a moment, and then she shifted uncomfortably. "What are you talking about?" she replied, her voice laced with feigned innocence. The denial was almost laughable. I wasn't there for games. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation any longer. "I have proof," I stated flatly, pulling out my phone and scrolling to the video footage I had captured at the bar. I felt a wave of adrenaline surge through me as I prepared to confront her with the evidence. "I saw you with Mark at the bar. I recorded the entire thing." Her expression shifted from confusion to anger in an instant. "You're insane. That's not what it looks like. We were just working," she snapped, her voice rising defensively. I pressed play, letting the video roll. There they were, laughing, flirting, and sharing secrets. Each moment of intimacy played out before her eyes, and I could see the color drain from her face as she watched the undeniable proof of her betrayal. The facade she had constructed crumbled in front of me as the footage continued. "Jessica, this is beyond just working. You are cheating on me with my personal assistant, and you've been lying to my face about it for months." I could feel my anger boiling over, but I kept my voice steady, determined to maintain control. "Stop it. This is just a misunderstanding. You're blowing this out of proportion," she shouted, but there was a quiver in her voice. The bravado was fading, replaced by desperation. I wasn't going to let her worm her way out of this. "A misunderstanding? You think it's a misunderstanding when you're out with him, acting like you're in a relationship? Don't insult my intelligence, Jessica. You've betrayed me in the worst way possible." The tension in the room was palpable. She was cornered, and I could see the wheels spinning in her head, searching for a way to escape this reality. Okay, I'll explain," she stammered, clearly thrown off balance. "Mark and I, yes, we've been spending time together, but it's just work. I didn't mean for it to happen." Her words were a poor attempt at damage control, and I could feel a bitter laugh building inside me. "You didn't mean for it to happen. You didn't mean to go out for drinks and flirt with him. You didn't mean to lie to me about it every single day." Her excuses fell flat, and as I watched her squirm, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was the woman I had loved, and yet I barely recognized her now. How could someone I had shared my life with become a stranger who tossed aside our commitment so easily? The confrontation dragged on for what felt like hours. She tried to spin the narrative, claiming it was all just harmless fun, that I was overreacting. But I wasn't having it. I had spent too long deciding how to handle this, and there was no way I would let her shift the blame back onto me. Finally, I decided it was time to drop the hammer. "You've made your choices, Jessica, and now I'm making mine. I'm not going to let this go unpunished. You think you can just walk away from this without consequences?" I leaned in closer, ready to deliver the final blow. "I've already started making calls, Jessica. I have connections in your industry, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you've done. I will ensure you never work in this field again." As those words hung in the air, the realization of what I had just said sank in. The panic in her eyes was palpable, and for a brief moment I found a dark satisfaction in her fear. I wasn't just hurt, I was ready to enact my revenge. I was no longer the victim in this twisted tale. I was the one holding the pen, rewriting the narrative. Jessica's face turned pale as she sputtered, "You can't do this. You're being too extreme." But I was resolute. I had been wronged, and now it was my turn to make sure she faced the music. I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to let it be silenced again. It was time for her to reap the consequences of her actions, and I was ready to watch her world crumble. After that confrontation, the atmosphere in our home shifted dramatically. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of what I had unleashed bearing down on both of us. I had spent years building a life with Jessica, and now I was ready to watch it all come crumbling down. But it was the only way I could find a semblance of justice for the betrayal I had endured. In the days that followed, I stayed laser-focused on my plan. I made calls and sent emails to contacts I had within Jessica's industry, carefully crafting a narrative that highlighted her unprofessional behavior. I didn't want to make wild accusations without substantial evidence. I wanted to lay the groundwork that would lead to her downfall. I began with discreet conversations. One of my closest friends, Alex, was a director at a marketing firm that often collaborated with Jessica's company. I reached out under the guise of seeking advice about a professional issue. "Hey Alex, I know you work with Jessica's firm sometimes. Can you tell me how things are over there? I've heard some concerning things about their team lately, specifically involving Jessica and her assistant." Alex was helpful. "Yeah, I noticed things seemed off. I've heard rumors flying around about her spending a lot of time with Mark. Some people are talking and it's not good." I felt a rush of satisfaction as I listened. People were already starting to notice the cracks in Jessica's facade. I strategically planted seeds of doubt, emphasizing how her behavior reflected unprofessionalism and raising questions about her competence. If she's not focused on her work, how can we trust her with clients? It's a concern for everyone. Alex agreed, and I could sense the wheels turning in his mind. I was building a network of doubt that would eventually reach the higher-ups at her company. In the meantime, Jessica was walking on eggshells around me. She had tried reaching out to discuss things, claiming she wanted to save our marriage, but I was having none of it. I felt like I was in control now, and I had no intention of letting her off the hook. Her pleas fell on deaf ears, and I refused to engage in any conversation that could lead to reconciliation. I was too far gone in my quest for revenge. I also began to gather more evidence. I continued monitoring her interactions with Mark discreetly, slipping into the bar again a couple of nights later, this time with a clearer plan. I needed to catch them in a more compromising position, something that could serve as irrefutable proof of their affair. I sat at the bar nursing a drink and waited for them to show up. When they finally walked in, I felt a surge of anger mixed with excitement. They were laughing, looking far too comfortable with one another. They sat at the bar, close enough that I could hear snippets of their conversation. I recorded everything, capturing their flirtation, the way they leaned in close, and the unmistakable chemistry between them. I felt like a predator stalking its prey, ready to pounce at the right moment. And then it happened. As they laughed and shared drinks, Mark reached out and touched Jessica's arm, and she leaned in, whispering something in his ear that made him burst into laughter. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes. My heart raced as I saw her completely disregard the vows we had made. I recorded it all, ensuring I had enough evidence to cover any potential denial on her part. I knew that this footage, combined with the emails I had already collected, would be the dagger that pierced her carefully constructed image. With this kind of leverage, I would be unstoppable. When I got home that night, I uploaded the videos, feeling an exhilarating high from having the upper hand. I could almost taste the sweet satisfaction of revenge. But as I prepared to send out my emails, I paused. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. I was about to unleash something that could ruin a life. Was I sure I wanted to go through with this? But then I thought of the pain she had caused me, the way she had shattered my trust. The anger bubbled back up, pushing aside any moment of hesitation. This was about justice. This was about making her understand the repercussions of her actions. I began drafting the emails, meticulously outlining my evidence without being overly emotional. I wanted to sound credible, like a concerned colleague rather than a scorned husband. As I clicked send on the final email, I felt a wave of catharsis wash over me. I had done it. I had taken a step toward ensuring Jessica faced the consequences of her betrayal. Now, all I could do was wait and see how the chips fell. In the following days, the tension between us escalated. Jessica picked up on my shift in demeanor, sensing that something was brewing beneath the surface. She tried to act normal, but I could see the anxiety creeping into her eyes. It was almost entertaining to watch her squirm, and I felt a twisted satisfaction knowing that she was completely oblivious to the storm I had set in motion. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I was sitting in my living room when my phone rang, displaying Alex's name. I had anticipated this moment, but hearing it from him made it all too real. My heart raced as I answered. "Hey, man, I just wanted to give you a heads up. A couple of higher-ups from Jessica's company reached out to me. They're concerned about her behavior, especially after some of the things I mentioned." I felt a jolt of excitement. "What did they say?" "They're looking into it. It sounds like they're planning to have a serious discussion with her. I don't know how deep it will go, but you should be prepared. It might get messy." "Let it be messy," I replied, feeling a dark thrill at the thought of her facing the consequences of her actions. She deserves every bit of this. As I hung up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over me. The pieces were falling into place, and I was finally going to reclaim my life. What I hadn't anticipated, however, was how quickly the fallout would begin to spiral out of control. I would soon learn that revenge has a way of coming back around, and I was about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. The next few days were a whirlwind of anxiety and anticipation. I would catch glimpses of Jessica, pacing around the house, her usual confidence replaced by a sense of dread. She had been avoiding me more than ever, likely trying to concoct a plan to salvage her career and our marriage. It was almost comical to watch her flounder, knowing that she was completely unaware of the chaos brewing beneath the surface. On the evening of the big meeting at her office, I decided to take a different approach. I wanted to be there when the fallout hit. I knew her schedule well enough to anticipate when she would be arriving at work, so I parked across the street from her office building, my heart pounding with anticipation. I needed to see the look on her face when everything came crashing down. As I waited, I replayed the details of my plan in my head. I had been methodical in gathering evidence, ensuring that I had more than enough to substantiate my claims. I had not only sent emails to my connections, but also forwarded the footage of her and marked to her supervisor, making sure it landed in the hands of the right people. It was a calculated move, and now I was ready to watch the consequences unfold. As Jessica pulled into the parking lot, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. She was dressed sharply, a tailored blazer over a form-fitting dress, an attempt to project professionalism and confidence that I knew was just a facade. I watched her walk into the building, her head held high despite the storm that was about to hit. About an hour later, I saw her supervisor, Lisa, and several other executives enter the building. I could only assume they were gathering to discuss the concerns that had been raised about Jessica's behavior. I waited, practically vibrating with anticipation as the minutes ticked by. I imagined the conversation they were having, the way they would confront her, and how she would try to wriggle out of the mess she had created. Finally, I spotted Jessica exiting the building about 2 hours later. Her expression was ashen, her usual demeanor shattered. I could see the lines of stress etched on her forehead and the slight tremor in her hands. My heart raced at the sight. I wanted to run to her and demand an explanation, but I reminded myself that this was just the beginning. I followed her as she drove home, each stoplight feeling like an eternity. By the time we reached our house, Jessica was visibly shaken. I was waiting for her inside, feigning ignorance about the meeting. As she walked through the door, I could see her eyes darting around the room, searching for something, perhaps a sign that I knew. "Hey," she greeted me, attempting to maintain a casual tone. "How was your day?" "Uneventful," I replied, trying to keep my expression neutral. "How about you? How did the meeting go?" Her response was immediate, her voice shaky. It was fine, just some routine evaluations. But I could see through her lie. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could sense that she was on the verge of breaking. Really? That's interesting, I replied, my voice steady. I thought I heard they were discussing some concerns regarding your work lately, something about unprofessional behavior. Her face turned pale, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. What do you mean? She asked, trying to mask her panic. Just what I heard, I said, trying to sound casual but unable to hide the satisfaction in my voice. I guess that's what happens when you're spending so much time with your assistant. People start to talk. The realization hit her hard, and she stumbled back, disbelief flooding her features. You would, she exclaimed, her voice rising. You wouldn't do that to me. I've already done it, I said, my tone cold. You made your choice, Jessica. You've put your career on the line by choosing to betray our marriage. Now you'll have to face the consequences. Her expression twisted from shock to fury. You're going to ruin my life over a mistake. You're being cruel, cruel. I echoed, barely able to contain my contempt. You think what you did was just a mistake. You've been lying to me, shattering the trust we built together, and for what? A fling. You gave that up for someone who's clearly not worth it. She glared at me, anger flashing in her eyes, but I could see the pain and fear etched in her face. You're sick for doing this, she spat, but I was unmoved. I had spent too long feeling powerless. I was done with the pity party. You've turned this into a living nightmare for both of us. I shot back, my rage boiling over. Now it's your turn to feel the repercussions. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our words hanging in the air. I could see the reality of her situation dawning on her, and it was both satisfying and painful to witness. I was still grappling with the emotional fallout of our marriage, but I had leaned fully into my resolve to take control of my life. In the days that followed, the fallout continued to unfold. I received calls from my contacts, informing me that Jessica's reputation in the industry was already taking a hit. Several people had begun to distance themselves from her, and whispers about her behavior circulated like wildfire. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction with each new piece of news that trickled in. But amidst all of this, a gnawing feeling began to creep in. As much as I wanted justice, I hadn't fully considered the consequences for Jessica beyond her professional life. I was so consumed by my desire for revenge that I hadn't thought about how deeply this would affect her personally. Watching her go through this turmoil stirred up something in me that I hadn't expected: guilt. One evening, as I sat in our living room reviewing the latest updates, I heard Jessica crying in the bathroom. It was a sound that broke through the anger and resentment I had held onto for so long. I could still feel the sting of betrayal, but a part of me began to realize that I was also hurting the woman I once loved. I wrestled with those feelings, unsure of how to reconcile them. Was I genuinely seeking justice, or had I become the villain in this story? I knew I had to make a decision. Revenge had initially felt empowering, but it was beginning to lose its luster. I was at a crossroads, and I needed to figure out what my next move would be. My desire for retribution was strong, but I also felt the need to break this cycle of pain that had engulfed us both. As I weighed my options, I realized that perhaps this was not just a story of revenge, but also a chance for redemption, both for Jessica and for me. I had the opportunity to regain control, not by tearing her down further, but by finding a way to address the hurt we had caused one another. It was time to confront not just the actions that had led us here, but also the possibility of healing. With the sound of Jessica's sobs echoing in my ears, I felt a shift in my perspective. The anger that had fueled my desire for revenge began to wane, replaced by a deep-seated sorrow for the state of our marriage. I had spent so much time plotting her downfall that I had forgotten about the love we once shared. It was time to confront the complexity of our emotions and the reality of what we had both lost. I gathered my thoughts and approached the bathroom, knocking gently on the door. "Jessica," I called softly, my voice steady but cautious. "Can we talk?" There was a pause, and then I heard her muffled voice. "I don't want to talk to you right now." "I understand," I replied, taking a deep breath, but I think we need to face this together. Please just let me in." After a moment, I heard the click of the lock and she opened the door slightly. Her eyes were red and puffy, and my heart ached at the sight of her in such distress. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and sat down on the edge of the tub, giving her space while still being present. "Look, I know I've put you through hell," I began, my voice softer now. "And I've been so consumed by my anger that I lost sight of what really matters. We both made mistakes, but I don't want to keep fighting like this." She crossed her arms, taking a step back. "You think I'm the only one who made mistakes? You've turned this into a war." "I know," I admitted, feeling the weight of my actions. "But I don't want to destroy you, Jessica. I do want to continue this cycle of pain. I just want to understand how we got here. Can we at least discuss it like adults?" The tension in the room hung thick between us. After a moment of silence, she nodded slowly, her expression wavering between anger and vulnerability. "Fine, but it doesn't change what I did." "I understand that." I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I want to hear your side. Why did you feel the need to cheat?" Jessica looked down at her hands, the reality of the situation weighing heavily on her. "I was feeling neglected, I guess. You were always so focused on your career, and I felt like I was fading into the background. I made a terrible choice, and I regret it every day." Her honesty hit me hard, and I realized that I had been so engrossed in my own feelings of betrayal that I had overlooked her pain. "I didn't see that," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. "I thought I was doing what was best for us, but I didn't realize I had been shutting you out. I'm sorry for that." She looked up at me, surprise flickering in her eyes. "You're really sorry?" "Yes," I affirmed. "Just as I'm sorry for how I handled everything after finding out. I let my anger take over, and I didn't think about how it would affect you or our marriage. I was so focused on revenge that I lost sight of us." We stood there, the silence stretching between us as we processed what had been said. It was a moment of recognition, a shared understanding that perhaps we were both lost in our own ways. "I don't know where to go from here," she finally said, her voice shaky. "You have every right to be angry, but I don't want to keep hurting you." "I don't want to hurt you either," I replied, feeling a hint of hope. "Maybe we can find a way to rebuild what we had. It's going to take time, and it won't be easy, but I think we owe it to ourselves to at least try." Jessica nodded slowly, her expression softening. "I'd like that." In that moment, I understood that healing wouldn't happen overnight. We had a long road ahead, filled with difficult conversations and painful realizations. But the very act of confronting our issues together felt like the first step toward something better. As we left the bathroom and moved back into the living room, I could sense a shift in our dynamic. It was as if we were both aware of the fragility of our relationship, but also of the potential for growth and understanding. I had no illusions that everything would magically resolve, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. In the days that followed, we began to communicate more openly. We talked about our feelings, our fears, and the ways we had both contributed to the breakdown of our marriage. It was raw and emotional, but it was also cathartic. I learned to listen as much as I spoke, and I found value in her vulnerability. We even decided to seek couples therapy, understanding that we needed a neutral space to navigate our pain and rebuild trust. I felt a sense of hope for the first time since discovering her affair, and it was a feeling I hadn't anticipated. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but we both recognized that. We had the chance to emerge stronger, together. As we began to untangle the threads of hurt and betrayal, I realized that our story was no longer just one of revenge and pain, but of resilience and the possibility of redemption. While the scars of betrayal would remain, we were both willing to work through them. In the end, I learned that the path to healing is often paved with difficult conversations and hard truths, but it's also filled with opportunities for growth and understanding. And as we took those first steps together, I knew we were on a new journey, one where we could reclaim our love and redefine our future.